Snow fell silently across the abandoned cabin, covering the world in white, yet nothing could hide the nightmare unfolding on that porch. 4 little girls, no older than 7, shivering and terrified, hung inches above the ground, their tiny bodies bound with thick rope, their breaths fading in the freezing air. Their whimpers were swallowed by the storm. No one was supposed to hear them. No one knew they were missing. No one knew they had been kidnapped. No one was coming. At least, that's what the kidnappers believed. Miles away, Officer Grant and his canine partner, Rex, were finishing a long shift when the dog suddenly froze, ears sharp, body rigid, staring toward the woods as if he sensed something no human could. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. "Rex? What is it, boy?" the officer whispered. Grant tried to pull him back, but Rex lunged, dragging him toward an old cabin at the forest's edge, one abandoned for years. Officer Grant chased him, unaware that every second mattered and that what they were about to discover would leave them stunned. And then he saw it. 4 innocent lives hung there in the freezing wind, their lips blue, their fingers stiff. Time was running out. Grant's heart stopped. "Dear God," he whispered, sprinting forward as Rex lunged ahead. Who left these girls here? Why were they taken? And more importantly, were they still alive? The truth behind why those girls were left there was darker than anyone could have imagined. What happened next would shock the entire town. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The snowstorm rolled in without warning, thick, heavy flakes drifting down like feathers from a torn pillow, smothering the world beneath a blanket of bitter white. Officer Grant wiped a layer of frost from his patrol car window and exhaled, watching his breath swirl in the cold air. It had been a long shift, the kind where silence felt heavier than danger. The forest road beside him stretched endlessly into the dark, its edges swallowed by drifting snow. Rex sat in the back seat, unusually tense. The German shepherd stared out the window as if studying something invisible, ears twitching with every distant sound. Grant chuckled softly. "Relax, buddy. We're heading in," he said, tapping the steering wheel. But Rex didn't even blink. When Grant stepped out to stretch his legs, Rex suddenly lunged forward, slamming his paws against the cage gate, barking sharply. Not the playful bark Grant knew well, but a warning, a demand. Grant froze. "Rex, what is it?" The wind howled across the treetops, rattling the branches like bones. Rex barked again, louder, deeper, then lowered his head, nose pressed against the air. He was tracking something. Grant felt a chill, but not from the cold. "You smell something out there?" Before he could grab the leash, Rex shoved the compartment door open, something he had never done, and leapt into the snow. Grant cursed under his breath and ran after him, sinking into the drifts up to his shins. "Rex, heel." But Rex didn't stop. He bolted into the tree line, barking in short, frantic bursts that echoed through the forest like a distress signal. Grant's heartbeat quickened. Rex was trained to detect danger, human distress, hidden threats, signs of life in impossible places. He wouldn't behave like this unless something was terribly wrong. Snow crunched beneath Grant's boots as he followed the dog deeper into the woods. The temperature seemed to drop with every step, the darkness swallowing him whole. He pressed the radio on his shoulder, but only static replied. Great. The storm was killing the signal. "Rex, slow down," Grant shouted. But Rex didn't slow, he sprinted. Then suddenly, he stopped. Grant finally caught up, breathing hard, his hands trembling from the cold. Rex stood rigid, tail stiff, growling low at something ahead. Grant followed the dog's stare. There, half buried beneath the snow, were footprints. Tiny ones. Multiple sets. Uneven. Dragged. Grant's stomach twisted. Children. Out here. In this deadly cold. Something was very, very wrong. Grant knelt beside the small footprints, brushing away the fresh snowflakes that kept trying to erase them. The prints were fragile, barely formed like the children were stumbling, barely able to walk. Some dragged to one side, others overlapped, as if they were being pulled. Grant felt his pulse throb in his throat. "How long have they been out here?" he whispered to himself. Rex whined softly, circling the tracks, nose low, breath puffing in sharp bursts of fog. His entire body vibrated with unease. He wasn't just alert, he was desperate. Grant had seen this behavior only once before, during a search and rescue mission where a missing boy was trapped under debris. Rex wasn't wrong then, and he wasn't wrong now. Grant pressed the radio again. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I've got possible child tracks heading northbound into Sector 7, requesting backup and thermal drone support." The radio sputtered static, crackling like fire. "Opie, back, storm in turf, hold." Then nothing. Grant clicked the button again. "Dispatch, do you copy?" Silence. The snowstorm was swallowing every signal. Rex suddenly barked and darted forward, yanking the leash so hard that Grant stumbled. "Rex, wait!" But the dog dug into the snow with furious determination, following a trail invisible to human eyes. He moved with purpose, certainty, as if something ahead was calling him. Grant had two choices: turn back and wait for help that might never arrive, or trust the dog who had saved lives more times than he could count. He tightened his grip on the leash. "Lead the way, boy." Rex surged ahead, weaving between the trees. Branches cracked under the weight of the snow, and gusts of wind whipped against Grant's face, stinging his skin. The deeper they went, the more the forest changed. The air felt heavier, colder, too cold. Rex halted again, this time beside a broken branch, smeared with something faintly reddish. Grant crouched and touched it. Sticky, fresh, blood. His breath hitched. Not frozen, not diluted by snowfall, meaning the children, whoever they were, had passed through recently. A low, eerie hum vibrated through the air. Grant stiffened. It sounded like metal vibrating in the distance, or something electrical failing under the weight of ice. Rex growled at the sound, ears pinned back. Then another noise emerged, soft, shaky, almost lost in the storm. A whimper. A child's whimper. Grant's heart slammed against his ribs. Rex took off again, and this time, Grant didn't hesitate. He ran. The deeper Grant followed Rex into the forest, the more the world seemed to tighten around them. The snow grew heavier, falling in thick sheets that blurred everything beyond a few feet. Trees stood like dark pillars, their branches sagging under the frozen weight. Every sound felt amplified: the crunch of boots, Rex's rapid breathing, the distant moan of the storm. But what chilled Grant the most were the footprints. They multiplied. At first it had been one set, then two, now four, maybe more. Tiny, overlapping, chaotic. Some were sharp and clear, others smeared as if the children were stumbling or being pushed forward. Grant crouched beside a pair of prints barely as long as his palm. "These kids can't be older than 7, he murmured. "What are they doing out here?" Rex paced in tight circles, nose twitching. He kept glancing back at Grant, urging him forward with anxious whines. The dog wasn't just tracking, he was pleading. Grant scanned the area again, his breath fogging in the cold air. Something was off. The footprints didn't follow a natural path, not like children wandering on their own. They curved and zigzagged in patterns that suggested fear, panic, escape. But then Grant spotted something that made his stomach twist. Farther ahead, the footprints suddenly became deeper, like the children were forced to run, leaving heavy impressions before slipping. Grant followed the trail to a patch of disturbed snow where something circular had been dragged. A rope? A sack? His hands curled into fists. "What were they running from?" he whispered. A harsh gust of wind answered, sweeping snow across the ground, threatening to erase the tracks entirely. Grant moved faster now. He couldn't afford to lose them. Not here. Not in this cold. Rex abruptly stopped again, tail stiff as a rod. His body lowered, muscles tight, his nose pushing into a mound of snow. Grant hurried over, brushing away the surface until a broken shoe appeared small, soaked through, frozen at the edges. A little girl's shoe. Grant felt his throat tighten. "This storm will kill them," he muttered. "They won't last another hour." Rex barked sharply, snapping Grant from his thoughts. The dog surged ahead, pulling him toward a cluster of pine trees bent in the same direction, as if something or someone had passed through with weight and force. The tracks underneath were sloppy, frantic. Then something else caught Grant's eye. Tiny handprints, pressed into the snow. Desperate, reaching. One smeared like a child had slipped forward while being dragged back. Grant's heartbeat thundered painfully. This wasn't just lost kids. Someone was leading them or forcing them deeper into the woods. A faint creaking noise drifted through the air. Grant straightened, listening closely. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't branches. It was something wooden, old, weathered, swinging beneath weight. Rex growled a deep trembling sound. Then through the drifting snow, a dark outline appeared up ahead. A structure, hidden, elevated, a cabin. The footsteps led directly to it. The cabin emerged from the storm like a ghost, its wooden walls weathered, its porch sagging under the weight of untouched snow. It stood silent, isolated, wrapped in cold and shadow, as if it had been forgotten by the world long before this night. Grant slowed, breath forming thick clouds in the air. Rex didn't slow at all. He lunged forward with a frantic urgency Grant had never seen in him. "Easy, boy. Easy," Grant whispered, though his own voice trembled. The closer they got, the stranger the place felt. Snow clung to the roof in heavy layers, icicles dripping like frozen daggers. No footprints surrounded the structure except the ones leading in. No tire tracks. No sign of an adult. Only the small, frantic prints of children. Grant swallowed hard. Something was terribly, painfully wrong. Rex pulled Grant toward the side of the cabin, sniffing aggressively at the porch. His ears pressed flat, his growl low and vibrating through the still, icy air. Grant stepped onto the wooden boards, and they groaned under his weight, an old, decaying sound that scraped against his nerves. Then he saw it. Rope fibers. Thin strands clinging to one of the porch posts, frayed and stiff from the cold. Grant brushed them with his glove, fresh enough not to be brittle. He scanned the area and noticed more pieces of rope, rubbed against the wood, hanging loose like something had been tied there, or someone. Rex suddenly barked one sharp, furious sound that shattered the silence. Grant jumped. Rex's body stiffened, his gaze locked on the cabin door. Snow blew across the threshold, but it couldn't hide the faint smear of something dark along the bottom edge. Grant crouched, heart pounding, and touched it. Cold, thin, not frozen yet. Blood. His breath hitched. His vision swayed for a moment as dread settled in his chest like ice. He grabbed the radio. "Dispatch. This is Officer Grant. I have a cabin in Sector 7 showing signs of distress, possible abduction, possible injuries. I need immediate backup." Static. The storm devoured his words a second time. Grant looked at Rex. "We're on our own." Rex stepped back, muscles tightened, bracing himself. Grant reached for his weapon, hand trembling. He pushed the cabin door open. The hinges wailed like a dying animal. Inside was darkness thick, suffocating, swallowing the light that spilled from outside. But through that darkness, faintly, Grant heard it, a soft cry. Small, weak, a child's cry. Grant's blood ran cold. Rex barked again, louder this time. They weren't too late. Not yet. The moment Grant stepped inside the cabin, the air changed. It was colder, far colder than the storm outside, as if the walls themselves held their breath, trapping every ounce of warmth from ever reaching the room. His flashlight flickered across the wooden floorboards, revealing splinters, scattered debris, and footprints, small ones everywhere. Rex stayed glued to his side, his growls vibrating in the tight air. Grant whispered, "Stay close," even though Rex already was. The faint cry grew clearer. A small, trembling whimper. Then another. Then 4. Grant's pulse hammered. He swung the flashlight toward the sound. What he saw made him stumble a step back. 4 little girls hanging. Not by their necks, but suspended from the ceiling by thick ropes tied around their wrists, their tiny feet dangling inches above the frozen floor. Their bodies were limp, shivering violently, their skin pale and dusted with frost. Their faces were streaked with tears that had frozen halfway down their cheeks, turning into glistening lines of ice. Grant felt the breath leave his lungs. For a moment, his vision blurred with horror. "Oh my God." Rex barked sharply, the sound echoing off the walls as he rushed forward, sniffing frantically beneath the girls, pacing, whining, desperate. The oldest girl, the tallest, maybe 9 years old, lifted her head with pure agony in her eyes. Her lips were cracked, blue from the cold. She whispered one fragile word, barely audible. "Help!" Her voice splintered something inside Grant. He holstered his weapon and sprinted forward, flashlight clattering to the floor. I'm here, hold on." His hands shook as he reached up to untie the ropes, which were knotted so tightly that his fingers burned trying to undo them. "Rex, keep them warm," Grant commanded without looking, and the dog understood immediately. Rex pressed his warm body against the youngest girl's side, whining softly, offering whatever comfort he could. The child weakly turned toward the heat, her eyes half open, almost lifeless. Grant worked as fast as he could. The ropes were cutting into the girl's wrists, leaving deep red grooves that bled slowly. Whoever did this had meant for them to die not from violence, but from the slow, merciless cold. "Stay with me. Stay awake," Grant urged as he untied the first girl. Her small body collapsed into his arms like a rag doll. He gently lowered her to the floor, letting Rex nuzzle against her for warmth. He moved to the second girl. She was barely breathing. Every inhale rattled inside her chest like broken glass. "Come on, sweetheart," Grant whispered, fighting the knot with trembling hands. "Don't leave me. You're safe now." The second rope snapped free. The third girl whimpered as he reached her, her head lolling to one side. Her tiny fingers were curled inward, frozen stiff. Grant swallowed the rising panic, clawing at his throat. Rex barked anxiously, pushing his nose against the girl's cheek, urging her to respond. Grant freed her. Then he reached the last girl, the youngest, the tiniest, her body shaking uncontrollably. Her wide eyes stared blankly into the darkness, unfocused, slipping away. "No, no, stay with me," Grant begged, cutting through the final rope. The fourth girl fell into his arms. He gathered all four children into a huddle near Rex, wrapping them in his jacket, rubbing their arms, trying to coax warmth back into their freezing bodies. "Dispatch. This is Grant," he shouted into the radio. "I have 4 minors, severe hypothermia, need medics, now." Static. Only static. Grant looked at the unconscious children, then at Rex. "We're not losing them," he whispered. "Not tonight. Not in this cold." Grant's hands shook as he knelt beside the 4 girls, their tiny bodies trembling or worse, barely moving at all. Frost clung to their eyelashes like white dust, and their lips were tinted a sickening shade of blue. Hypothermia, advanced. Minutes could mean the difference between life and death. "Rex, stay close," Grant whispered, his breath shaking. Rex pressed himself against the youngest girl again, his warm fur shielding her from the icy cabin air. He nosed at her cheek, letting out soft, anxious whines, as if begging her to stay alive. The child stirred slightly, only slightly, but it was enough to spark hope in Grant's chest. Grant shrugged off his heavy jacket and wrapped it around the 2 smallest girls. He tore his second layer, a thermal shirt, and draped it over the remaining 2. Come on," he whispered as he rubbed their arms vigorously. "Stay awake. Stay with me." The cabin creaked under the weight of the storm. Wind howled through cracks in the walls, turning the room into a freezing tomb. Grant grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, Unit, 47 urgent medical needed, 4 minors in critical condition. Repeat, 4 minors, severe hypothermia." Static hissed back at him. He slammed the radio against his palm. "Not now. Not now." He leaned closer to the oldest girl. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't speak. Their skin was ice, their breaths shallow, their bodies limp. Grant knew hypothermia protocol. Remove wet clothing, apply heat gradually, keep them conscious. But he also knew something else. Without medics and proper treatment, the window to save them was closing fast. He scooped the youngest girl into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. She weighed almost nothing, like holding a bundle of feathers. Her tiny fingers twitched against his coat. "That's it," Grant whispered, emotion tightening his voice. "Fight. Don't give up." Rex lay down beside the other 3, wrapping his body around them, warming all he could at once. His tail thumped weakly, as if encouraging them. Grant had seen Rex brave fire, collapse during searches, and push through exhaustion, but he'd never seen him like this. This wasn't instinct. This was heart. Grant rubbed the second youngest girl's hands, trying to coax color back into her skin. "You're safe now. I promise." His voice cracked. "Just hold on." He tried the radio again. "Dispatch. Do you copy?" Nothing. He looked around the cabin. No blankets, no firewood, nothing but rotting boards and cold air. He couldn't stay here. If he waited, they would die. He had to move them. Grant inhaled sharply and nodded to himself. "Rex, We're carrying them out. All four. Rex lifted his head, ears perked. Ready. Grant wrapped the girls tightly in whatever fabric he had left. Stay with me, he whispered, lifting the first child into his arms. The storm roared outside, but Grant pushed toward the door. He would not let the cold win. Not tonight. Grant stepped toward the cabin door, the youngest girl cradled in his arms, her icy cheek pressed against his chest. She was barely conscious, her head lolling, her breaths faint and uneven. Rex stayed close, nudging Grant's leg as if urging him to hurry. We're getting you out of here, Grant whispered, tightening his hold. Just stay with me. The girl stirred weakly. Grant froze. Her tiny fingers curled around the fabric of his jacket, her lips parted, trembling with the effort to speak. Grant leaned down quickly, desperate for any sign of responsiveness. What is it, sweetheart? Her voice came out as a thin, broken whisper so soft he almost missed it. They said no one would find us. Grant's breath hitched. Who said that? Who did this to you? Her eyelids fluttered, her pupils unfocused, her voice barely more than a breath. They're coming back. The words stabbed through him like ice. Grant's pulse spiked. He scanned the dark tree line through the cracked cabin door. The storm had softened visibility to only a few feet. Snow swirled like white smoke, making every shadow look alive. He shifted the girl in his arms and knelt beside the other three children, who lay huddled against Rex, wrapped in whatever warmth they had left. The oldest girl opened her eyes for a moment, glassy, frightened, and nodded weakly, confirming the warning. Grant's jaw clenched. This wasn't over. The danger wasn't gone. Whoever did this might be closer than he thought. He pressed the radio again. Dispatch, urgent possible suspects returning to the scene. I need backup now. Static. Only static. Grant's heart pounded in his ears. The girls didn't have time for him to wait, but he couldn't outrun armed kidnappers in a blizzard while carrying 4 half-frozen children. Rex growled suddenly low, rumbling, warning. Grant stood slowly, holding the youngest girl tight. What is it, boy? Rex moved toward the door. Sniffing, tense, pointed. Grant swallowed hard. Something or someone was out there. He looked down at the girl in his arms. Her eyes drooped shut, exhausted from the effort of speaking, but her fragile whisper echoed in his mind. They're coming back. Grant's hand tightened around his weapon. If the kidnappers were returning, he had only minutes, maybe less, and 4 little lives depending on him. The cabin walls trembled with each gust of wind, but the sound that made Grant's blood run cold wasn't the storm, it was the crunch. A single, deliberate crunch of a boot sinking into snow. Rex snapped his head toward the door, ears stiff, body rigid. His growl deepened, vibrating across the wooden floorboards. Grant gently lowered the youngest girl beside the others and positioned himself between them and the door. Another crunch, then another. Slow, methodical. Someone was creeping toward the cabin. Grant's mind raced. He had no backup, no working radio, 4 unconscious children, and Rex trembling with instinctive fury. He peeked through a crack in the doorframe. Through the swirling snow, a silhouette moved between the trees. Tall, heavy, a hood pulled low. The figure paused, bending down as if inspecting tracks. The same tracks Grant and Rex had followed. Grant's heart pounded. They were tracking their victims, coming back to finish what they started. Rex snarled, teeth bared. Easy, boy, Grant whispered, but his own voice was tight, unsure. He wasn't calming Rex. He was preparing him. The footsteps grew louder, closer, now circling the cabin slowly, as if the intruder knew someone was inside. Grant stepped back, gun raised, positioning himself with a clear line of sight. His breath fogged the air, his fingers tightening around the cold metal. A shadow passed the frosted window. Grant's muscles locked. A second shadow followed. Not one person. 2. Rex's growl broke into a sharp bark, echoing through the cabin like an alarm. The oldest girl whimpered softly, her eyes fluttering, sensing danger. Grant crouched beside her. Shh, I've got you, he whispered. I'm not letting anyone hurt you again. The crunching stopped. A heavy thud hit the porch. Snow shifted. Boards creaked. Someone was standing right outside the door. Grant raised his weapon. Rex lowered into a crouch, ready to launch. Then slowly, deliberately, the doorknob began to turn. Not fast, not frantic, soft, controlled, terrifying. Grant stepped forward, planting his feet firmly, his finger hovering over the trigger. "You open that door," he warned in a low, icy voice, "and I promise you, you're not walking away." The turning stopped. Silence. Then a whisper from the other side, male, rough, mocking. "You shouldn't have followed the tracks, officer." Grant's breath froze. Rex lunged, barking with explosive fury. Outside, the snow shifted again, footsteps retreating, circling, repositioning. This wasn't a rescue anymore. This was an ambush. And Grant knew. The fight for these 4 girls was just beginning. The cabin door rattled as the wind howled, snow spraying through the cracks. Grant steadied his breathing, weapon raised, muscles coiled like steel. Rex crouched beside him, every inch of fur bristling, hackles raised. The girls lay behind them, bundled together, breath shallow but still present, still alive. A sharp bang slammed against the outer wall close, intentional. Then another on the opposite side. "They're flanking us," Grant whispered. Rex growled in agreement. The footsteps were no longer cautious. They were closing in with purpose. Grant edged toward the window and stole a quick look outside. 2 figures, both masked, both armed. One carried a rope, the other, a metal pipe. Rage surged through Grant's chest. They didn't come to scare him. They came to finish the children. A thud hit the door, followed by a guttural voice. "Step outside, officer. We just want what's ours." Grant tightened his grip. "You're not taking them." Silence. Then the window, beside him, exploded inward. Glass shattered across the cabin as a masked man lunged through the opening. Grant spun, blocking the blow with his forearm. Pain shot up his arm, but he powered through, slamming his shoulder into the attacker and forcing him back. Rex launched like a bullet. The dog clamped onto the intruder's arm, dragging him to the floor with a vicious snarl. The man screamed, thrashing wildly, desperate to shake Rex off. "Good boy, hold!" Grant yelled, turning just as the second attacker kicked the door open and charged inside. Grant met him head on. The pipe swung toward Grant's face. He ducked, the metal grazing his scalp. He countered with a punch to the ribs, feeling the attacker wheeze but not fall. They grappled, slipping on ice scattered across the floor. Behind them, the girls whimpered weakly. One cried out. Grant's vision sharpened. Failure wasn't an option. He shoved the attacker against the wall, ripping the pipe from his hands. The man lunged again, but Grant struck first, one hard blow across the jaw. The attacker collapsed, dazed, gasping. Rex released the first man only long enough to reposition and pin him, snarling inches from his throat. Grant panted, adrenaline burning through his veins as he aimed the pipe at the second intruder. "Don't move. Either of you." Both men froze, one pinned by Rex, the other clutching his jaw in agony. Grant didn't blink. "If you touch these girls again," he said coldly, "I swear you won't walk out of this forest." Outside, sirens faintly echoed through the storm. Help was coming, but Grant and Rex had already won the first fight. Grant kept his weapon trained on the 2 attackers, while Rex stood guard, teeth bared, a low warning rumble vibrating in his chest. The kidnappers didn't dare move, not with Rex's jaws inches from their throats, and Grant's stare cutting through the dim cabin like a blade. Outside, the faint sound of sirens grew louder, muffled by distance, swallowed by the blizzard, but unmistakable. Relief washed over Grant, though he didn't loosen his stance. Help was close, but not close enough. Rex barked sharply, turning his head toward the door. Grant followed his gaze. The storm had intensified. Snow slammed against the cabin like waves crashing against rock. Wind howled, rattling the broken window, scattering icy shards across the floor. The sirens wavered, dipping in and out as if struggling against the growing whiteout. Grant pressed a hand to his radio. "Unit 47, to responding unit, suspects in custody. 4 minors need immediate extraction. I repeat, immediate conditions deteriorating." Static. Then a broken reply. "Roads blocked. Snowdrifts approaching on foothold position." The transmission cut out again. Grant cursed under his breath. The storm was burying the forest faster than they could move. Even if backup reached them, evacuating 4 half-frozen children through the blizzard would be nearly impossible. He turned to the girls. Their breathing was shallow, their skin ghost pale. They needed warmth, medical support, insulated blankets, things he didn't have. Time was slipping through his fingers like snow. Rex nudged one of the girls gently with his nose, whining. She stirred weakly, and Grant's chest tightened. "Hang on, sweetheart. Help is coming," he whispered, though fear twisted inside him. Would help arrive in time? A distant shout cut through the storm. "Officer Grant, call out." Grant rushed to the doorway. "Over here," he yelled, waving his flashlight through the whiteout. Shadows moved between the trees, officers pushing against the wind, bundled in heavy winter gear, each step a battle. But the moment they reached the cabin, one officer shook his head. "We can't get vehicles in. The drifts are too high. We'll have to carry them out." Grant glanced back at the shivering girls. Rex barked again, urgent, determined. Grant nodded. "Then we carry them." The storm raged harder, but Grant straightened with renewed resolve. They had backup now. And nothing, not the cold, not the darkness, not the men who tried to kill these children, was going to stop them. Inside the cramped cabin, the officers worked with frantic urgency. The storm roared outside, shaking the walls, but Grant barely heard it. His focus was on the 4 little girls lying motionless on the floor. Their breaths were faint, erratic. Their skin looked almost translucent beneath the thin layers Grant and Rex had used to warm them. "We're losing time," one officer muttered, kneeling beside the oldest girl. He checked her pulse and looked at Grant with alarm in his eyes. "Her core temperature is dangerously low." Grant swallowed hard. "What do we need?" "Heat, insulation, body contact, anything to slow the drop." Rex whined sharply, pressing himself against the smallest girl again, instinctively warming her tiny frame. His tail thumped once, weak but determined. "Good boy," Grant whispered. "Keep doing that." The officers unpacked emergency blankets, chemical warmers, thermal wraps, everything they had carried on foot through the storm. Grant spread a foil blanket over the girls, tucking the edges around their fragile bodies. The metal shimmered under his trembling hands. One officer held a lantern close, providing a small pocket of warmth. Another gently lifted one girl and tucked her inside his thick jacket, sharing his heat. Grant did the same with another child, feeling her cold seep through layers of clothing straight into his chest. "Come on, sweetheart. Stay with me," he whispered, rubbing her arms rhythmically. "Just breathe. That's all you need to do." Her eyelids fluttered, barely. The oldest girl's lips parted. "Cold," she breathed. Grant leaned close. "I know. It's okay. We're warming you up. You're safe now." Her eyes drifted to Rex, who was licking the youngest girl's cheek. A faint, fragile hint of relief touched her frozen expression. Another officer called out, "Thermal checks. How's their consciousness?" "Still fading," Grant answered. "But they're responding to touch." A break, small, but real. The cabin filled with the sound of officers working in synchronized urgency. Warmers activated with rustling snaps, coats wrapped around shivering frames, lanterns angled for maximum heat. Every movement carried a single purpose: keep them alive until extraction. "Grant," one officer said quietly, "they wouldn't have lasted another 30 minutes alone." Grant's throat tightened. He looked at Rex, whose body still curled protectively around the smallest girl. Snowflakes clung to his fur, melting into tiny drops of water. "You found them," Grant whispered to his partner. "You saved them." Rex lifted his head, eyes warm, determined. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, hope flickered, fragile but growing. The girls were holding on, and Grant vowed they would keep holding on until they were safe. The hospital doors burst open as officers rushed the 4 girls inside, each child wrapped in layers of blankets and clutched tightly in an officer's arms. Grant followed close behind, Rex at his heel, both covered in snow and exhaustion but refusing to slow down. The warmth of the hospital hit them like a wave: soft lights, rushing nurses, the sharp smell of antiseptic. "Room 3, now, get warming units," a nurse shouted. Doctors swarmed instantly. Machines beeped. Heated IV fluids were prepared. One girl was placed under a thermal dome. Another was fitted with a breathing mask. The youngest whimpered softly as a nurse gently wiped frost from her cheeks. Grant stood back, his chest heaving. He'd faced armed suspects, explosions, and burning buildings, but watching these fragile little girls fight for breath terrified him in a way nothing else ever had. A doctor approached him. "You found them in time," she said. Their core temperatures were dangerously low, but they're responding to treatment. They're fighters. Grant exhaled shakily, finally letting himself breathe. Rex brushed his head against Grant's hand, sensing the shift from urgency to guarded relief. Grant knelt and hugged him tightly. You did good, boy. Minutes stretched. Nurses worked with practiced precision. Warmth slowly returned to tiny fingers and pale cheeks. Then finally the oldest girl's eyelids fluttered open. A nurse leaned close. Sweetheart? Can you hear me? The girl blinked, dazed, then looked around the room as though waking from a nightmare. Her gaze found Grant. He stepped closer, voice soft. You're safe. No one is going to hurt you anymore. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, You came back for us. Grant shook his head gently. Rex found you? He wouldn't stop until he did. As if on cue, Rex patted over. The girl reached out with trembling fingers and touched his fur. Rex licked her hand softly, his warm breath easing her trembling. A weak smile formed on her cracked lips. Another girl stirred next, coughing softly before gasping out a few broken words. The man, he said. No one would find us. A doctor soothed her. You're safe now. Just rest. Grant swallowed the anger burning in his throat. The youngest girl, barely conscious earlier, opened her eyes at last. Her first sight was Rex lying beside her bed. Her tiny fingers curled around his fur. Doggy, she whispered. Rex's ears perked, and he nudged her gently. The doctor approached Grant again. They'll recover, she said softly. Because of you? Grant looked at Rex. No, he replied, because of us. The hospital quieted as night settled, but Grant's mind refused to rest. He stood outside the girls' recovery room, watching through the glass as nurses checked their vitals. Rex lay at his feet, alert despite exhaustion. Every so often, his ears twitched, instincts still sharp. Footsteps approached. Detective Harris, bundled in winter gear and dusted with melting snow, strode up to Grant wearing a grim expression. We have news, he said quietly. Grant straightened. What did you find? Harris motioned him toward a hallway away from the girls' room. We interrogated the suspects you and Rex detained. They cracked fast. He paused, jaw tightening. What they were doing out there, it's worse than we thought. Grant braced himself. Tell me. Harris took a slow breath. The men are part of an illegal trafficking ring operating across state lines. They target vulnerable children, runaways, kids from families in crisis, and recently, they started targeting siblings. Grant's stomach dropped. Siblings, like those 4 girls. Yes, Harris nodded. They were taken because they matched a request from a buyer. The men were supposed to transport them to a remote exchange point. His face hardened. But the storm hit. Their vehicle got stuck. They panicked. They couldn't make the meeting. Grant clenched his fists. So instead of helping the children, they tied them up and left them to freeze? Harris nodded painfully. They thought the storm would cover their tracks. No evidence. No witnesses. Rex growled, a low, furious sound vibrating through the hallway. Grant rubbed his back gently. I know, boy. I know. Harris continued. They planned to return once the storm passed to move the bodies. That's why they came back while you were still in the cabin. Grant's jaw tightened. They weren't coming back to check if the girls survived. No. Harris's voice darkened. They came to make sure they didn't. The weight of the truth crashed down like a second blizzard. Grant looked through the window again. The girls lay in soft hospital beds, wrapped in warm blankets, their small chests rising and falling steadily. Alive? Safe. Because Rex refused to ignore what he sensed. Grant swallowed hard. Do they know what happened? Not fully, Harris said. They're traumatized. But the therapist says they trust you and Rex. When they're ready, they'll talk. Grant nodded slowly. Whatever they need, we'll be here. Rex placed a paw on Grant's boot, as if making the same promise. Harris exhaled. You saved 4 lives tonight, Grant, and you stopped a nightmare from getting bigger. Grant looked down at Rex. We did. Morning sunlight filtered softly through the hospital windows, casting warm golden rays across the children's recovery room. The storm had finally broken, leaving behind a world washed clean by snow. Inside, the air was calm, gentle beeps of monitors, soft breathing, blankets rustling as the girls slowly began to wake. Grant stepped inside quietly, Rex beside him. The dog walked carefully, as if he instinctively knew the room held fragile hearts. Nurses paused when they saw him, smiling. One whispered, "They've been asking about the dog." Grant's chest warmed. "Then let's not keep them waiting." The oldest girl noticed them first. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but recognition. "Officer," she whispered, her voice still raspy. "You came back." Grant approached slowly. "I told you you were safe now." He knelt beside her bed. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," she admitted softly. "But warm." Her gaze drifted to Rex. "Can he come closer?" Rex didn't wait for permission. He padded forward, placing his head gently on the edge of her mattress. The girl reached out with trembling fingers and touched his fur. The moment she did, her eyes filled with tears, not of fear, but relief so deep it broke something inside Grant. "He saved us," she whispered. Grant's voice tightened. "He did." Another girl sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. When she saw Rex, her face lit up with a small, fragile smile. "Doggy," she mumbled, reaching for him. Rex moved closer, letting her tiny hands explore his fur. The youngest girl, the one who had barely clung to life in Grant's arms, stretched out both arms toward Rex. "Warm doggy," she said, voice thin but full of love. Rex gently nudged her cheek and licked away the tear that slid down her face. A nurse approached Grant. "They asked earlier if you and Rex would stay until they fall asleep again." Grant nodded immediately. "Of course." He sat beside their beds, Rex lying on the floor between all four girls like a protective guardian. One girl rested her hand on Rex's back. Another curled her fingers around Grant's sleeve, unwilling to let him go. For the first time since the nightmare began, the room felt safe, peaceful. The oldest girl looked up at Grant, her voice barely above a whisper. "Were you scared? Out there?" Grant smiled gently. "Yes, but Rex wasn't. He kept going until he found you." The girl nodded slowly. "Then he's our hero," she said. Grant stroked Rex's head. "Yes," he whispered. "He truly is." Night settled gently over the hospital, the world outside blanketed in fresh snow that shimmered beneath the streetlights. Grant stood near the window of the quiet hallway, watching the flakes drift lazily from the sky. After everything they had survived, the storm seemed softer now, almost peaceful. Rex sat beside him, leaning against his leg, his warm presence grounding Grant in the silence. A soft footstep approached. Grant turned to see the girl's doctor, her expression warm but serious. "You saved them," she said softly. "All four. Their vitals are stable. Trauma will take time, but physically, they're going to make it." Grant exhaled, relief filling his chest like warm breath on a cold night. "I'm grateful," he murmured. "But Rex, he was the one who wouldn't stop." The doctor smiled. "Then he saved them too." As she walked away, Grant knelt down, taking Rex's face gently in his hands. "You knew," he whispered. "Long before any of us. You felt their fear, their pain. You didn't give up, not for a second." Rex nuzzled his hand, letting out a soft, comforting grunt. Grant stood and walked back to the girls' room. Through the window, he watched them sleep huddled together, tiny hands curled under blankets, safe for the first time in days. The oldest girl still clutched the stuffed animal a nurse had given her. Another slept with her fingers tangled in a strand of Rex's fur he had shed on her blanket. The sight hit Grant hard. Not long ago, they had hung helplessly in a freezing cabin, their fragile lives dangling by threads. And now here they were alive, warm, protected. "Because of him?" Grant whispered again. He stepped inside, moving quietly so as not to wake them. Rex followed, lying down in his usual spot beside their beds. One of the girls stirred, reaching out sleepily until her hand found Rex's back. She sighed contently and drifted off again. Grant's heart squeezed. He lowered himself into the chair near the bed and rested his elbows on his knees. "Rex," he murmured, glancing at his partner. "After everything we've been through tonight reminded me why you're more than just a K9. Your family. You're their angel." Rex closed his eyes, tail tapping softly against the floor. Grant looked at the sleeping girls, their peaceful breaths filling the warm room. "This world," he whispered, "still has hope because of heroes like you." And as snow continued to fall outside, Officer Grant knew one truth more clearly than ever. Some angels don't have wings. They have paws.